Welcome to Room to Grow with your ally Chad, a podcast where a white privileged male, me, invites people to teach him as much as they can about the sensitive subjects that are prominent in today's society, such as racism, women's rights, addiction, and mental health. This podcast is for open-minded people who want the information that is out there but don't know where to look. My name is Chad Moores. Join me and let's learn and grow together. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Room to Grow. Today we have a very special guest with us today. She played Christmas Eve in the original Broadway cast of Avenue Q. Before the pandemic, she was working on the Broadway-bound musical Dave. She has written some screenplays, one of them being The Mikado Project, which got multiple medallions at film festivals. The list goes on. Please welcome Erin Quill. Hi there, Erin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm really glad that we are able to do this.
Yes, I apologize to everyone for any ambient noise. I've had to move out of my apartment into the office of the building because my neighbor decided to do construction today and didn't let any of us know. So if you hear ambient voices in the distance, that is because the building's an echo chamber, and I apologize.
Yes, but that's what happens when you live in New York.
That is what happens when you live in New York. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just in New York a couple of weeks ago for 2 weeks. I was doing a show at the Chain Theater on 36th, and like every time I wanted to call someone, because I was walking like every day, all day, pretty much just going back and forth to different places. And every time I was on the phone, people could only hear half of what I was saying because of sirens and, hey, do you like live comedy? And,
Right.
all of those different things. So,
Those pushy guys in the suits, I feel sad for them that it's summer, but then they're so aggressive.
Yeah, they are.
In Times Square, they're so aggressive that I'm like, get away from my kid.
Well, and I try to give them the benefit of the doubt sometimes. I had this man come up to me, and I knew I was getting scammed, but he, it was my fault. I wasn't moving. I was standing still, which is
Can't stand still in New York.
You can't stand still in New York, and or someone will come up to you and ask you for stuff. And so the guy came up and said, hey, I don't do drugs, I don't drink, I don't do, whatever. And he's just like, can I have something, a bottle of water and something small in my stomach? I'm like, well, yeah, I can go right here. And he goes, no, this is perfect place over here. And I was like, well, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I was like, I want to feed somebody if I can. And he was just like, it's right across the street. I said, okay, fine. And then he said, there's an ATM right there. I said, no, none of that. I said, I will.
No, you can't go to an ATM.
No, I was like, if you want something, I'll go, you pick something out and I'll buy it for you and I'll see you walk away with it, And he was like, oh, okay, there's a store right over here. And so we walk. He didn't bring me far. It was like 3 minutes down the street. And then all of a sudden he goes, oh, no, it closed. And he's pretending that this liquor store used to be another store. And he goes, I guess I'll just get a nip, and started walking in. I'm like, no. I said,
the only thing is you can't advocate, like if you've agreed to give, you can't advocate what you're giving. Yeah. You have to kind of go with them. But I will say, do not go to an ATM with anybody. And I'm not scammed per se, but I spent more than I was anticipating. I had the same thing happen when we were in DC. Mm-hmm. I was rehearsing Dave, and this guy came up, in front of this fast food place, and he said, can you help me out? And I said, sure. And I took him in, and he proceeded to order $35 worth of food. And I was like, sir? And then the lady behind the counter said to me, she was like, don't ever do that. He does this all the time. And I was like, oh, well, okay. New to the city. What did I know? You'd think coming from New York, I'd be a little bit more like, okay, here's $20. Sometimes, you got to put a limit on it.
Yeah, so, I try.
For you.
I've been to New York enough times to know to just kind of avoid eye contact and keep going. But if I'm standing still, I haven't gotten to that point of like, oh, they're coming, so then walk away, or I just haven't gotten there yet. But I feel even if you're, especially if you're a nice person, you want to hear them out, you want to help.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate that there's so many people out there that are looking for stuff that you really shouldn't be helping them out with. And then it makes it hard that when somebody does come up and really does need something to eat and something to drink, that you refuse to help them because of situations like that. It really stinks that that's how that works, you know.
It's hard to guard against being taken advantage of and still then be willing to help people. But we do the best we can.
Yes.
Everything's a case by case basis.
If
So
if you have a couple minutes to hear them out and see if there's really something that
yeah,
you can do, take the chance. That's what I say, at least. And
yeah,
I took the chance twice because I had another person do that, and they said they needed something to eat and drink for insulin. I just took my insulin,
sure.
and I was like, that's a good excuse. I said that's good, and I was like, we're right in front of this bagel place. That's where I'm meeting my cast. So if you want to go in there, and he said, oh, no, across the street is $2 for 2 hot dogs. I said I'm not leaving where I am. I said, if you want to go in with me and get a bagel while I'm here, that's fine, but I'm not. So he walked away. I said, okay, well. That's why I'm guessing he was trying to lure me probably to the same place because it was like right in the same area. So,
Uh-huh. Well, yeah.
anyways, moving forward, Erin, you've worked on so many things. If I missed anything, if there's anything really
Oh, you didn't
important,
miss anything. I mean, I joined Avenue Q when it was already Broadway bound, so it was so I was covering Anne Harada, and but yeah, I was a member of the original Broadway company,
hmm
and I have done a lot of things since then. And I've done actually during the pandemic, I've had the opportunity, I guess because of self-taping and because of, limited access to, a plethora of actors. I've actually been doing quite a lot of television work.
really,
So, yeah, so this season, I guess it's okay to say once they're starting to air, but this season I'm on Pretty Little Liars for HBO Original Sin, and I'm on the season finale of the other two, and I did some of the Blacklist, and I
great
know
show.
and I just finished filming this movie, which is starring Vanessa Williams, called Eternal Buzz. So
Oh,
I've just personally wrapped. They have another week, but like I personally wrapped um, that, and I play this young actress Leah Lewis. I play her mom, and she's in her 20s, I'm guessing. And the funny thing is, like, I've played moms before, and my kids have always been like 11 and under, and so this is the first time I'm having like a 20-plus-year-old daughter, and I really had to examine my feelings about it because, like, I was like, am I? And then I'm like, no, technically I'm old enough to have a daughter
right.
age. I was like, but it still kind of hurts. Um, but I was playing her mom, catching her in a kind of a mess up during her teenage years.
hmm
So I think that's why, I was playing.
So, let's get down to the nitty gritty here. I have a few questions here for you, and then after
Got
that,
it.
I do want to give you the floor. So if there's anything after some of these that spark some stuff that you want to bring up, that would be great too.
Okay.
So a few years back, you were talking to a theater company I was working with at the time about Avenue Q, because we were trying to put the show on, if you remember,
Oh,
and
yes.
and we could not find a Christmas Eve to be in our production, and we tried so many things. We tried to force my wife to do it, we met in theater in high school, but that wasn't really. She hasn't done theater since then, and we had a couple of we had an Asian male that we were trying to get to do it, and he wanted nothing to do with it and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately we decided to not do the show. And from what I gather from our previous
Right choice. That was the right choice, by the way.
yes, and that, and I completely agree with you because um you know Elaine Bard, she puts on amazing shows. I mean, for she is one of the most talented directors that I've actually worked with. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, she pushed me. She pushed me every time. And I was actually kind of glad we didn't get to, because I was going to be Preston in Avenue
Oh,
Q. And then, but when we recast,
Princeton.
what?
Princeton.
Princeton. Yeah, because as you know, I do my homework. No, so yeah, I was going to be Princeton. I said it right now. Um, and then we decided to do Sweeney Todd instead. And but luckily I got to be Sweeney in that, so that was
Oh, well,
It
there
was,
you go.
yeah. But I know very little about this subject, but from what I gather from our previous conversations is that you work diligently to get diversity and good representation into theater. If I remember correctly, there was a video that Elaine had shared where you were in some sort of meeting or something that and
Oh
and
yeah,
you
that
would.
was my that was I was invited. So the timeline goes that I started a blog when my son was just about to be born because my husband was like, "You are going to be bored and you're not going to be able to work and you're going to be stuck with the baby and you need something." And
Mm-hmm.
I was very resistant to the idea of a blog. Very resistant. I was
Okay.
like, I don't who's going to listen to me? Nobody's going to care what I have to say. I hate blogs. There I don't read anybody's blog. Anyway, fast forward to my child was born. I did try to start my blog with like a couple of like half-hearted posts, like just whatever, like like things I learned about fighting from a drag queen and stuff like that, like just like little things because I was thinking in my head that I was working on a book at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the point of the blog. And really, it was just to keep me occupied because I'm bad when I'm not occupied.
I feel yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was a 4 a.m. feeding, and I looked around and I couldn't get back to sleep. And meanwhile, Chill and the baby are passed out, like they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I started, looking at the internet, which as you do, and I came across the announced casting for La Jolla's The Nightingale, which The Nightingale is set in China. And I had had several friends who called me during, just to catch up, and they said, do you know anything about this thing, The Nightingale? Because we can't get in. And I was like, oh, what is it? And they were like, it's a new musical and it's set in China and we can't get in. So when I saw, oh, The Nightingale is announced, I decided, okay, well, let's see who's in it. So I clicked on it and there were almost no Asians in it. There was one local girl who was like 11 playing the Nightingale, and she was covered with feathers, so much so that you couldn't tell what she was, right? And then there was one girl who was mixed race Japanese, and she uh, was playing a spoiled princess. And then every other part was not played by anybody that was Asian, but they were still using Asian titles. Like they were still the Dowager Empress of China, the Emperor of China, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked it up and I saw that Moises Kaufman had directed it. And I started to get really pissed off because Moises is somebody that I've always looked up to and admired. He has amazing taste. He created the Laramie Project and several other projects. He has his own theater company and he workshops things for a long time. And so I wrote this blog post, Moises Kaufman Can Kiss My Ass, and Here's Why. And it's still up, by the way, folks, if you want to check it out.
Yeah, I'll have to get that link from you.
Yeah. So because of that, so I put that article up and then I went to sleep. And I really thought, nobody is going to care what I have to say. I'm just going to post it to my Facebook, my personal Facebook, and like my friends will read it and be like, "That's okay, honey. It's this is the way the world works." Now, this was a long time ago, so representation was not a conversation
Mm-hmm.
that was on our stages in regards to Asian Americans specifically. It was not, everybody seemed to understand that like blackface was wrong, and everybody, kind of was getting that, only embracing like white presenting Latinx people was not cool. Like people were starting to like have an inkling that that was wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
and I think it does play into our the public perception of Asians is that we don't say anything. But I am not 100% Asian,
Okay.
and my dad was Irish, and so and my dad's family. My dad was a union lawyer. His uncle Mike helped found the transit union. Like we've always been rabble rousers on that
Mm-hmm.
side.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote the blog and then I posted it, and I didn't think anybody would look at it. And the next morning, Chill like woke me up. I was like, "Why are you waking me up?" And he goes, "Did you write something last night?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because it has 5,000 views and it's 10 a.m." And I was like, "What?" And then I chose not to be able to check the numbers of the
Mm-hmm.
blog on my phone because I was like, I sometimes get obsessive and I don't want to like I don't care if people read it or don't. It's just how I feel. And then I got in 3 days, I had 25,000 views.
Wow.
And not just views within the United States, all over the world.
Wow.
And uh, as far away as like parts of Africa and parts of the Middle East. And I was like, who is reading this in the Middle East? Who cares about representation and casting in the Middle East? But I mean, if you were in the Middle East, yeah,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you know. So what so what happened was then I was invited to speak at LA Stage Day. And at LA Stage Day, that's the speech that's in the auditorium
Okay. Yep.
that you saw. And the interesting thing about all the now, when I wrote it, it caused a huge controversy, so much so that different Asian groups chose and individuals chose to speak on it and speak on what I write, but nobody asked me. So they were all speaking. They were all people I knew. They're all
Mm-hmm.
friends of mine and everything. They were all speaking for me, which I thought was really kind of odd. But there's a little bit about like scarcity within the Asian American Pacific Islander acting community. So like if somebody gives you the spotlight, it's not necessarily something that you share. Um, so I was literally watching a news clip and watching my friend, the newscaster asked him, why do you think Erin Quill wrote it? And they said, well, we don't know why Erin Quill wrote it, but here's what I think. This is how Erin
Oh,
Quill
jeez.
thinks. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like a really odd kind of thing. And so, as it turned out, that's kind of when different organizations that, I don't want to say piggybacked my work, but they did. That's when they first got their big recognition because they did have to, because they were an organization and I was not, they were asked to go and speak on this issue at roundtables with La Jolla, and that I got to see. I watched it like everybody else, streaming on my computer, breastfeeding. Um, and, there were a couple of points that were missed that I thought could have been discussed. But anyway, all of that led to a lot of conversation about representation in casting and representation in regards to Asian Americans. And the next thing after that LA Stage Day thing was that I believe that the Royal Shakespeare Company cast a show. Again, they took one of China's oldest plays called The Orphan of Zhao, and they paid for a translation, and they sent artists over there to adapt this translation. But then when they came to casting, even though this play was still set in China, they did not use any East Asians in the show. So they had this giant multi-million-dollar production mounted at the Royal Shakespeare Company that was ostensibly about one of China's oldest plays that was equivalent to Shakespeare in their experience. And they had one East Asian puppeteer and they had one East Asian maid, and then the rest of the company was multiracial. But they were wearing East Asian costuming and like everything. And the marketing for that one was very specifically done like it was going to be an all East Asian cast, which would have been the first that they did. So I had artists from England reach out to me, and I wrote in support of them and their production, their issues with the Royal Shakespeare Company. They said they couldn't get any traction in the Fairy Princess, which is what it's called, Fairy Princess Diaries, did have a following. So I wrote about that. And then Dallas Summer Musicals decided to do The King and and I looked up the actor who was cast as the King, and I was like, I don't know. And what happened was he was not Asian in any way at all.
Mm-hmm.
You always have to check because, and as a multiracial person myself, I always check on that because of, you know, you want to be accurate. You don't want to accuse anybody or wipe away how they identify.
Right.
So I reached out to him personally on his website, and he like laughed. We had gone to the same school, so it was kind of like, hey, I'm a fellow alum. I just have a question, and he answered it, and I wrote about it, and then they wound up having to recast an East Asian or an American Asian actor, Pacific Islander, Alan Arellano, who is Filipino. So yeah, there's been a lot of that type of controversy. I wrote about the Mikado. I've written about the Mikado several times. But Jeff Yang, who writes for the Wall Street Journal and a couple of other papers and magazines and websites, said that he believed my piece was definitive and the conversation about the Mikado should end now because I am a classical voice major. I was a classical voice major at Carnegie Mellon, and I did have a different take on the Mikado that was different, and I had seen the original or one of the iterations of New York Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikados, and I wrote about what I saw. And seeing that production was what prompted Chill to say, I want to direct the Mikado project as a film, because it was so poorly done and so very, very racist. And we were sitting in an audience, and we were the only Asians in the audience, and everybody around us was laughing and poking each other and chortling over all these jokes that they added, and they added things that Gilbert and Sullivan never intended. They added characters that Gilbert and Sullivan never wrote, and it was all seemingly in the vein of like, let's push this envelope of making fun of Asians, as opposed to what was great about the Mikado in and of itself.
Yeah.
So because, and so that's kind of where that goes. So I do advocate for inclusion in casting, and I also advocate for like just a bit of kindness within casting.
I mean, we all know that there are certain stereotypes when it comes to ethnicities, when it comes to sexual orientation or any of those kind of things. And, there are a time and a place to do those kind of things, as long as it's done tastefully. But, I mean, it is to quote Avenue Q, it's a thin line. You step right over there and you've made a mistake. And I don't feel well versed in those kind of things to even touch that. I just, when I was younger and naive and all that kind of stuff, of course, I think I think we did it and we didn't think anything of it. And then, of course, when I started getting older and really understanding what this was doing to other people, I very much changed how I did. And again, talking about this is why this podcast for me, I think, is extremely important, because something that you had said is that, like, getting it right from you. You know what I mean? Like, I can have my own opinions and I can voice those, but I want to hear it from somebody that's actually dealing with these things, and get the information and feel more comfortable. So then when someone does want to talk to me about it, I can be like, well, I actually heard it right from their mouths. You know what I mean?
Right. It's a different thing to appreciate a culture as opposed to appropriate a culture. And, I speak every year at Broadway Con. I have these panels, and the actors come on and the writers come on, and we all talk about these different issues that really are pointed towards our group. The subject in general lends itself to every group, but specifically to our group, which is AAPI, which is Asian American Pacific Islander group, we have some real issues with how we're portrayed in American culture. And the thing is that, we're still in they are the first Asian American Hamilton on Broadway. Shobha Narayan is the first South Asian woman to ever play Jasmine in Aladdin. We're still at the cusp of this is the first. Like, we still have to count firsts. And, I remember at Broadway Con, this man turned around to me and he said, I read your blog, and my position was that my child played Christmas Eve. Of course, there's so many, like, of these stories, that his child played Christmas Eve in the local production of Avenue Q, and she was not Asian. And I said to him at the time, I was like, well, what are you teaching her with that? What are you teaching her with that? Are you teaching her that the presence and the inclusion of Asian Americans is dependent upon white say so? That seems like what you're saying. That we'll allow you to have this part, but if it's not convenient to us to if it's not convenient to us, if it interferes with our production schedule, or if we just feel like we can't find anybody local, we're going to go ahead. So that negates our humanity. That negates our experiences. Some people, I saw this thing and Anne clapped back. Anne clapped back on it, which I was glad to see, and I kind of like just echoed her. But Anne and Bobby Lopez and I have all discussed this. And Bobby is also, similar to me, mixed Asian. And we have all said Christmas Eve must be played by somebody of Asian descent. You know, she must be played because there are specific jokes that if an Asian tells them, they land. And if somebody who's not Asian tells them, then then the whole room gets uncomfortable, unless you're in, I guess, a Klan room. So, so that's, I mean, that when you erase Asians, and by that I'm using the broadest span of Asians, East Asians, South Asians, Western Asians, you know, most of the world is considered Asia. If you
Right.
go to a map. So like we are the global majority. And I do have a friend that likes to refer to himself as a person of the global majority. We are people of the global majority. And the thing is, when you negate our humanity by erasing us from the stage and from the screens and from the small screens, then people don't get to know us. And what happens is, honestly, hate crimes. And we see that now. We see a huge rise in hate crimes, particularly since the pandemic. And I know that this is true because I was verbally attacked 3 times during the pandemic. You know, I went into the grocery store and the woman saw my eyes over my mask and freaked out and like started screaming at me to get away from her and that she just didn't want to die. And I was like, "Excuse me, I just want to get ice cream." She's like, "Yeah, well, I don't want to die. Get away from me." And that supermarket was full of people of all different, you know, groups, or not full because it was the pandemic, so it was like but you know, nobody knew how to step in and nobody knew what to say because like that kind of irrational reaction to somebody who has my eye shape is not normal. It's not normal. And then the second time was I was in Dunkin' Donuts with my son, and my son at the time was like 6 or 7, and this man just started screaming. I cleared my mask behind my throat. I cleared my throat behind my mask. I just was like, because sometimes with the masks you do get dry.
Of course.
And I wasn't sick. I wasn't sick. My son wasn't sick. We were wearing masks, and the guy just started screaming at me. He's like, "If you're sick, if you're infected, like just get out." And like we did not know where to put it. Now the entire the entire staff of that Dunkin' Donuts was South Asian, and I was there as and my son presents as Asian. So like we were all just completely shocked that it seemed like a guy who was, you know, a rational human being who could walk in and order his coffee just like anybody else would go off like that. But it was kind of like the things that he was saying, he had been given permission to say. And the reason people take those liberties is because they don't see us as people. They see us as workers, like they see us as like garment workers, or they see us as farmers, or they see us as like tech people, but they don't see us.
Right.
And that's why stage and the arts are so important. People really oftentimes put down the arts and put down the messages that the arts can relay.
So much.
So much so, and you'll find yourself gaslit a million times by your cousin who's a stockbroker, or your postman who like only watches sports or whatever. But during the pandemic, what became clearer than anything else really was how much America relies on the arts. They were bored, they were stuck at home, and they were looking for entertainment. They were looking for an escape. And who provided that? Artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, because there was a lack of East Asian content, not, it's getting better, but because there's a lack of East Asian content, people felt free to pop off on me. And the worst was that I had taken my 2 nieces to the park and my son. And my nieces they look white. They look white. They're multiracial, but they look white.
Yep.
One's blonde, one's brown haired, And this little boy had been harassing them. And I said, well, you know what? We'll just go, because we'd been there a while. And my son was like, yeah, he was kind of bothering them. So we walk out, and my youngest niece said to me, and this is where feminism and like intersectionality all come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my niece said to me, Auntie, can you go tell his mom that he was not behaving? And I was like, Gracie, sometimes it's better to just walk away, like,
mm-hmm.
especially at the park, because parents are nuts, right? Parents of small children are not, all they are in is defense mode, right? Whatever you say to them bounces off me, sticks back to you, right? So part of me is like, why didn't I know better? But like what we wound up getting was an education, because I went up to the woman and I said, hey, can I just talk to you for a second? Listen, your son was a little aggressive with my nieces, and they just wanted me to, let you know, so that the next time they're a little he kept running after them, and he was poking them, and he was calling them names. And she was like, oh, no, my son wouldn't do that. And I was like, well, okay, he did it. I'm just letting you know, I'm not taking any space up or anything. We're leaving, so it's not going to be an issue. And then this man that had been kind of like flirting with her, talking with her, they were both Caucasian. He went crazy on me. He was like, you're a disgusting person. He goes, I should have known the minute you came in. You're disgusting people, you people with your diseases. And he went out, and it was completely unhinged. And, and it was in my hometown park, which I grew up here. And so like, I'm not used to that kind of behavior. That's not how the parents behave. And the other parents in the park were actually all over by a swing set. So they were kind of far away. They were a couple 100 feet. So like, I saw some of the men get like, what's going on over there? But they weren't really close enough to hear what had happened. And so he just started screaming, going off, to the point where the woman said to him, oh, no, don't say that to her. Like, don't. And my nieces and my son were right there. And as we walked to the car, my niece Grace, who's the youngest, she said, why did that happen? And Liam said, that's my son. He said, because we're Asian. He goes, that's what happens when you're Asian. And I felt terrible that he had learned that lesson. I felt a little helpless that he had learned that lesson at such a young age, because that was also during the pandemic. So, the pandemic was not good for him mentally. I mean, it wasn't good for anybody mentally, but for him in particular, he did get a lot of like backhanded microaggressions at school and at sports. And, in a way, when we stopped having to go to school, and we did it all online, that was better for him, because he wasn't getting the microaggressions of kids whose parents or grandparents watch Fox News and come home and don't care what the kids hear, right? Yep. So then the kids grow up and they perpetuate it on my child. And I thought that it was kind of over. And this past year he took tennis, and there were a couple of little Asian boys in his class. And, there's a park right outside. So we went to the park after, and they were playing. And the littlest one, who is such a pipsqueak, he's so cute. It's like Pocket Rock. He's so cute. He just matter of fact told me all the things people had told him he was, because he was Chinese. And I was shocked. I was really shocked. And I said, where'd you hear that? And he said, at school. I said, well, what did you say? And to be fair, his parents are very active parents. They're Asian American as well. And I don't know how they handled it at home. But I was mostly upset for the little one because he is little. He's so little.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart.
It
Really.
really, yeah. I can completely imagine. My wife is half Asian, quarter Irish, and
Oh, same
quarter
thing.
Canadian. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah. So I really
My
only,
cousin?
she might be. Are
He
you?
might be. We had a bunch in Canada.
Yeah. You related to the Chins?
I wouldn't say no. I
Okay. Well,
wouldn't
you
say
never
no.
know. You never
My
know.
great grandfather was one of those Chinese guys that had like
Hmm.
wives and concubines and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
everything's possible.
Right. For me, now we've been together since high school, my wife and I, and I've only really dealt with her specifically for being Asian. Any kind of she she doesn't talk to me about it. I'll be honest with you. Every once in a while it gets brought up, and she'll like just very nonchalantly say, "Oh yeah, no, it's the pandemic. I didn't even know about the excuse me for like the China virus. I didn't know anything about that until she had said something, and it was like a 2-second conversation, and then it was over. So I didn't even know how big it really was. I didn't see it take any effect because I don't know if she's not going through it or if she's I really don't know anything about it, which is another reason why I invited you today, so I could be a little bit more versed
I
with it, because I don't want to, the only time that I ever saw her get talked to inappropriately because of her ethnicity was we were on a cruise, and the cruise came off of Texas,
Oh, that's where they
which
came from.
mind you, almost everybody on there was from Texas. Like, I remember we made friends with these people that were sitting right next to us in the main dining room, and we started having a good conversation, and it seemed like we were going to have a lot of fun sitting next to them every night. And then I had mentioned that I had a gay sister who was married to a woman, and they had children, and they never talked to us again. I was like, oh,
Hmm.
because I'm from New England, where we don't. I mean, at least I don't see it. I just, because I am a white privileged male, so I don't deal
Yeah.
with it. But we were in the nightclub that they had at the very top of the cruise, and it was dark. So my wife looked a little darker than normal. So I
Right.
guess she got someone thought that she was black, and so when I was going and getting her a drink, I just said, I was like, "Oh, can I have a seltzer?" And the guy next to me was like, "Oh, you don't want chocolate milk?" And I went,
Oh, yeah.
"Excuse me?" And he's just like, "Oh, it just looks like you like chocolate milk." I was like, we're gonna go." And like Tammy didn't hear it, my wife didn't hear it, and
Yeah.
I was just like, I want to get her out of here. And then I explained what happened when we got out of there, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to be." It was we enjoyed the cruise, but we didn't get to hang out with anybody because everybody was just had that feel. I felt very icky, very gross
Yeah.
being there.
My,
Um,
one of my best friends is happens to be white, and we went to school together. And one time I was visiting her. She lives in a different state, and I was visiting her, and she was trying to tell me about this vacation. They went on this amazing cruise again, right? And it was a smaller cruise, so it was a her first husband was very wealthy, and they went on this tiny cruise, like 8 couples on a boat
oh, okay, yeah, that's very small.
in Europe. Yeah, very fancy. And she said, Erin, we sat down at dinner, and this guy who's like, a millionaire, billionaire, probably a billionaire, from Texas, went off all his theories about Asians and everything. And she was like, and I didn't know what to do because I'm not Asian. I'm not supposed to speak for you, but like, you're my best friend. I was like, listen, you know what? I'm not asking you as a white person to always like take it on the chin for me.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm asking you to do is recognize that there are very racist people out in the world that think nothing of the comments that they say, and they truly believe them. I don't think anyone's an accidental racist. I don't think they like have drive-by accidental racist incidents, and then they're like, oh wait, maybe I should rethink that. Like, no, I don't think so. I think they do it on purpose, and you have to recognize it for what it is. It's a instrument of one, white supremacy, but it's also an instrument of intimidation. And it's sometimes it's really too much for anyone to continue to take on. I have friends of every shade in the spectrum and every lifestyle, and 90% of it, if you're in any way a minority, you do have to let go, because you can't harbor this backpack of microaggressions that the world gives you every day. Sometimes you have to be able to get up and like put your pants on and your shoes on, like just like everybody else, get the kid dressed, get out to school, whatever. But there are those moments, and this is when white support is like the most important, is when you witness it against your partner or your friend or your family member, and when you don't say something in that moment when the person of color is with you, that's the big no-no, right? That's the bit, like, and I feel like people can tell, like, when they're dealing with somebody that's like an unhinged, dangerous individual, and when they're just like dealing with an asshole,
right?
Like, there's a lot of bullies around, people who think that they just like, okay, I have $20 so I can tell you to go jump,
right?
And like those kind of people you can fully take down and embarrass and like whatever. But then there are those people that are seriously unhinged, and you kind of like you have to like really take into account who's with you. Now, like the guy in the park, he was seriously unhinged. I was like really grateful that he didn't have like a weapon.
Oh, honestly. Yeah, that must have been, yeah.
He had that crazy eye thing, and I was like, I got it. My instinct was get the kids away.
Right. Yeah. You need to know, at least on my end, I try to assess the situation and see, is this a teaching moment? Is this a moment where I just let this happen and exit as quickly as I can? You just, like, I mean, for instance, like my father, very, very open-minded person, but very naive, very ignorant. I mean, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, that's how he was raised. But he's willing to, he'll say something and I'm like, oh, and I'm like, hey, Dad, think of it this way. And he'll go, oh my gosh, I didn't think, and I love that about him. He is so,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's so.
Ignorance really just means you don't know.
Right. And it's not a bad thing, as long as you're able to again, that's what this podcast is for. It's for people that don't know, that want to know, didn't even know that they didn't know it's one of those things. I'm learning things today that I'm really appreciating, that I'm going to take with me for the rest of my life. That's really great. I just remember my father meeting my wife's Asian side of the family. Now, my wife's father passed away right before we started dating, so he never met him, neither did I. But we wanted to set up a time for him to meet that side of the family. This was like a few years back when we became like really, really serious, and he was nervous. He was very nervous. Meeting, just like he was going to be a minority, which in New England that's very rare to walk in and be in a minority. So we went in there. And he had a great time. Everybody was really welcoming. He had lots of conversations, and it felt like a really good day. And then we were driving home. My wife was driving, and he said, "I had such a fun time. Wow, they were so." I didn't what did he say? He says, "I didn't know they were going to be so American." And I just melted, and my wife was very displeased with the situation, but I didn't say anything at that time because I didn't feel like it was appropriate to have Tammy also be now in the spotlight, considering what was going on. But I talked to my dad and I said, "Dad, it's very similar to you you're Irish. If you had walked in and you had an Irish accent, you would be surprised, but you weren't surprised when you walked in. They're all from America. They literally were born in America, just like you. It was one of those. I kind of described it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like white skin tone is supposed to denote Americanness and belonging, whereas like a skin tone like mine, like instantly I'm a foreigner.
Exactly.
I could not have been born here because I don't look like the Caucasian majority. And the truth, or even like Black Americans have said to me, like, "Baby, where are you from?" And I'm like, New York. It is, a constant struggle because we've always been, the history of Asians in America is not that we originated here, although you can see some similarities. Like there's a lot of theories about the interconnection between Asians and Native Americans, and you can see it a little bit in, we have a similar look, some of us, but they don't equate Asian phenotype, meaning how my face looks, they don't equate that with birth citizenship, which is like a really interesting thing because, in fact, this guy Wong Kim Ark was the first Asian American, he was Chinese American, to sue the U.S. government for birthright citizenship, meaning that he was born here, he went to visit relatives in China, he came back and they wouldn't let him in the country.
Right.
And so he sued the U.S. government and he won. And that's why if you're born in America, you are an American citizen.
Right.
And it's so funny to me that all these people who, if you actually ask where they're from like Lithuania or Romania, or, like their family background is not white.
Right.
My family background is Irish. I know exactly where my Irish family is from. And, I know that side of the family is Irish. It's not American. So we do need to change how we have these conversations. I do know, when I was I toured with Patty Noonan, doing traditional Irish music for 3 years in Florida. And I had all these grandparents, these Irish American grandparents come up to me and they said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you singing the music because my grandchildren don't look like me, and now I know that they cannot look like me and still appreciate aspects of the culture." And I was like, great. And then I was like, wait, why couldn't they appreciate aspects of the culture before? So there's a lot of work to be done by people who don't acknowledge that just because you don't look like them, that has any indication of where you belong or don't belong.
And I think my father's still working on it. He's
of course he's a man of a certain age, and
right. And I'm so proud to have him as a father. That because I grew up really, really well when it comes to open-mindedness and stuff. Of course, again, I lived in it was mostly white people in my like high school. I remember at one point, people were voicing for Michael B. Jordan to be the next Superman.
Oh.
And I was like, that's really awesome. I was like, let's go. I like shared it on Facebook. I was like, that would be awesome. I firmly believe that he would have been an amazing choice. And Superman, and the reason is that Superman's story never really involves him celebrating his race in any way, shape, or form. Someone voiced that they said, well, it wouldn't be fair for him to be able to do that if they couldn't have a white person play Black Panther. And I was like, but see, the difference is that Black Panther's story is about his heritage. It's about that. It's about that. So of course you couldn't have a white person doing that. But when I did Rent a few years back, and I played Tom Collins, which in the Broadway performances, it's always pretty, as far as I can remember, it's always been done by a Black person. But that his story his character doesn't have anything to do with, like, I mean, if you read the text, it has nothing to do with him being black. So it's
Yeah.
okay for me to. I was very concerned at first, and then I really thought about it, and I was like, no, I'm allowed. I can do that. But if it's part of the
He
story,
has no lines that
right,
say anything about his being black.
right,
But he's always been played by a black man.
right,
I've never seen it done with a non-black person. So like, and I mean, there has to be room for that discussion too. That like,
mm-hmm,
if the character is not tied to an ethnicity, that if they don't have the cast, obviously they're going to have to look out. The like right now, I saw a discussion on does Marcy Park in Spelling Bee need to be Asian? In my experience, I would say yes. The character's name is Park. Park is a very distinct Korean surname, and the actress who originated the role, which was Deborah S. Craig, she was a Korean American adoptee, and so much of her DNA is in that character, because not that she spoke 6 languages, but when she told me when she was doing the workshop, she kept saying to Bill Finn, like, well, I can do this and I can do that and I can do that, and that's what it became, because Deborah's very much an enthusiast, and she's always trying to come up with new stuff. So to me, if you don't have somebody to do Marcy Park that's Asian, I would say then you have, because Park is not just a Korean surname, then I would say, okay, but she still needs to be a person of color.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't actually know. I did Spelling Bee a few years back. I was when I played Chip Tolentino, and
Chip was also played by an Asian American. He was played by Jose Lanya.
Oh yes, I did know that. So now now you have me like all thinking about that kind of stuff. So no, it was an no, we had we had a black female play the counselor, but that was our only diversity that we had in the show. We didn't have everybody else was white.
And I think that there's certain shows that really a multi-ethnic cast is kind of a requirement. I do feel that Spelling Bee is one of those shows.
That's good to know.
I think Rent is one of those shows.
Okay.
Just because Rent is supposed to portray New York City.
Okay. This is good to know.
Yeah, so like you have to look. So I used to be on the Screen Actors Guild Asian American subcommittee. Mm-hmm. And there was a clause that I think has since gotten cut, but it is a really important clause that was in the producers' agreement with Screen Actors Guild, which was that the producers agreed to quote unquote reflect the American scene. And by that, it means that, like, for example, if your show is set in a hospital in Seattle, you look at the population of that city,
mm-hmm.
then you look at the population of that profession, demographic-wise. And then from there, you proceed with casting so that this show is reflective of Seattle, which is why Grey's Anatomy always kind of pissed me off because, Sandra Oh was amazing and remarkable, and I know her and she's unbelievable, but she was like, I was like, there's only one Asian doctor in the whole of Seattle, Grace? Like, what is going on? There's no Filipino nurses. There's no, what is happening?
Right.
And like, they've just recently announced, and I stopped myself before I did it, but they've just recently announced that like Harry Shum and like 2 other Asian actors are joining it. And I was like, oh my God, it's like they finally went to a hospital, like, it's like they finally went to look at the medical profession and said like, hey, there's a little bit, not being represented here.
Yeah.
But in that, the producers did argue back in certain ways that, if they only reflected the numbers that were representative of the actual population, then that would negate the inspirational aspect of casting that they wanted to encourage. So like any persons that were not, and I was like, Meredith could have been Puerto Rican or something. But anyway, it doesn't,
Everything is whitewashed. I mean,
everything is whitewashed.
everything. And, I
And you
only
don't
really just
realize
started.
how overwhelming it is until you kind of get in there and realize that, like, and I'll spill some tea. Sandra saw me at the farmer's market or something. And she called me, or no, she saw the casting director for Grey's Anatomy at the farmer's market. And she called me and she said, hey, there's this part coming up on the show and I want you to do it. I told the casting director about you and everything else. So I got a call, I went in and I auditioned. When I saw that later, I didn't get it. But when I saw it later, it was a white person. So, it takes a lot of, and she asked me, she goes, whatever happened to that? You didn't wind up on the show. And I was like, did you see who was on it? And she's like, no, I wasn't part of that storyline. And I was like, oh, well, they cast a white person. And like her face just fell. Because honestly, how much more, if you're one of the stars of the show and you recommend somebody that can do it, and then you see that you were just told, like, and when I went in, I remember the guy that was casting was like, oh, well, you're a friend of Sandra's, right? And I said, yeah, but I also went to Carnegie Mellon.
Right.
And he was like, whatever. And that happened a lot in LA.
Yeah.
They didn't expect me to be any good. They didn't expect me to have any training, all of which I had. It's not just the directors. It's the casting directors. It's getting approval from the producers. It's a whole list of steps. When people call for inclusion and diversity, they don't realize how much like white panic bells they set off, because it goes fully down the chain. Like, they're calling the casting director, you got to get me some Asians, blah, 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 right? And then the casting director's like, I can't find any. No, let's be frank, there's a shit ton of people of color auditioning all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But if you walk in and you're like completely not seeing them as a potential lead of a series or a potential recurring guest star, like if you're not seeing them for higher than like 2-3 lines, that's a problem. That's a problem that you have to process as a casting director.
Right.
Because you're the first one that gets to speak to the execs and the director for that episode. You're the first one. So it's on you, and yet it's unfair because they can bring in 100 people of color and the director can turn and be like, I want a white guy. And that actually happened to me when I was working on a television show. I was subbing in for the casting assistant. The casting director was out because she had done the terrible thing of having a baby, right? And that was like a terrible thing. Oh my God, she's out. Can you believe it? How rude. And I was subbing in because she was out on pregnancy leave. And they had this potential skit that they wanted to do because it was a comedy show. And they said, the director came in and he talked to me, the producers, and they said, and this is a quote, it's not my origin, I wouldn't say this, but they said, oh, well, for that director character, we want a Spielberg callback, so get us somebody like, I won't say it, just basically get us somebody with a beard that looks like Steven Spielberg. And I stood up to them, and I was only a casting assistant, but I was like, you know what? That's a really tired piece of casting to say that the director in every sketch needs to look like Steven Spielberg. That's like an old joke. I said, all the sequels and everything else, that's done by some hot director from Asia. I was like, so how about I bring it? And they flat on looked at me and said, Asians are not funny. And I was like, well, you know what? I'll bring in 3 Asians. Let me bring you in my Asians. And then if one of them is not funny, if none of them are funny, I will go and find your Steven Spielberg lookalike. So 3 came in. They all had a huge comedy background, and they wound up casting 1. And they called me later, and they said, this guy was so good. Every time we have a director character, he's coming back. So it's hard, but you can advocate if you are in casting. You can, stand up. But I will say this, I said that's kind of tired and everything, my little speech at the table read. And then I got pulled to the side by the producer of the episode, like, don't you ever fucking say that and embarrass me that way in front of a bunch of people. And I was like in my 20s. I was like, what are you talking about? You know, I was like, I'm serious. I have funny people. Just let me bring them in. Like, don't, you know. And he kept saying, like, I used to produce the Bernie Mac show or whatever. I was like, that's fine. That's good. But the Bernie Mac show was like, how long ago? You know, you don't get that credit anymore. Now you have to step it up. The show revolves around white people, and the show is too white to stay on television. So, like, honestly, let's mix it up.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
But it's rare to have that much belief in yourself when you are an assistant in casting.
Right.
Or when you are beginning the journey. I had a conversation years ago with a guy. He was an Asian American producer. He was working on Friends. I was like, dude, come on. And he goes, I said, the Chinese delivery person was a blonde girl. He's like, girl, I cannot say anything. I am the lowest on the ladder there. He's like, I'm just trying to like wait for my next job and maybe like in 3 jobs I'll be able to say something about that stuff.
Right. I mean, it's all political.
It's all political.
Go ahead.
No, and people have to be willing to hear it. Like,
yeah.
That's the thing. When you're dealing with LA and when you're doing with Broadway and on whatever level you are, Broadway and theater and entertainment is a primarily white institution. It's a PWI. And the thing is, we are there at the behest and the request of white people. That's true. And so we are still all across the board finding our way, and people don't want to get out of the way and let somebody of color into the room. They don't.
Well,
you know?
it doesn't make any sense to me because, you know, I mean, some of the just choices that people make for casting, it boggles my mind. Like, I mean, there's not one person that I've talked to, this is a little bit outside the scope of what we're talking about, but also at the same token, the same thing, who thought that casting Russell Crowe in Les Mis was a good decision. Why? Like, I want to go and see it because a talented person who could play that role. I mean, Russell Crowe is talented, but
Russell Crowe is talented. He's you know, the thing is, like, honestly, the director on Les Mis did a crap job because he made people sing live, and then he didn't go and like edit out their kind of like, you know, if you sing something, poor Samantha Barks singing that on my own 15 times on a stage in the rain, like, honestly, that's abusive. And, you know, she was used to doing 8 shows a week, so she is the one that sounded good. Aaron Tveit, same thing. He was used to singing 8 shows a week. Eddie Redmayne, singing 8 shows a week. All those people that were theater trained, they came out of it smelling like a rose. But honestly, a lot of the performances in that the director thought were like just real, and it was too distracting to watch them because the vocals were not there.
No, I 100% agree with you. It's one of those things where, again, it's all politics. There's so many times where I go and I see these musicals and I'm like half of the casting choices, I'm like, you could have just picked somebody with these people are talented, but you could have picked other people. There were so many other decisions that you could have made, but you picked it for the name, you picked it for the ethnicity. You know, it's frustrating because I still, and it frustrates me because I also go and I still watch these things and I still go and support them. But
well, it's hard. Like the new Into the Woods is completely diverse and inclusive, and it's fabulous. You know, it's
I
on
wish
Broadway.
I had seen it when I was there.
It's extended till October. And, you know, I saw an article with Philippa Sue saying how much she was enjoying being a Cinderella of color. And the truth is that Cinderella is a Chinese fairy tale. That's like an origin Chinese fairy tale.
Didn't know.
Yeah, well, what other group was known for cutting off pieces of their feet to fit in shoes? You think the Grimm brothers came up with that all on their own? No. I mean, that was that, it can be traced back. And, like, actually, a lot of the fairy tales, the Grimm fairy tales, they have their origins in East Asia, South Asia, and, and actually Western Asia, like places adjoining. So, you know, and Stephen Sondheim knew that. And I know that because when I was a child, Into the Woods, the original Broadway production, was the first Broadway production I ever auditioned for.
Oh.
I was a child. They called my sister's manager. I wasn't even auditioning for things at the time. And they said, well, the origin story of a lot of these fairy tales is Chinese, so Steven's wondering if, like, maybe he can get an Asian kid in there. And, like, did they wind up going with me? No, because, like, I didn't know what I was doing, and I had no audition experience whatsoever. Like, I sang, and that was it. So clearly they made at least a good choice there. But, the point is, like, Stephen Sondheim knew that there was a connection to various cultures, that these fairy tales did not come out of nowhere. And if more people would do that kind of work and really start thinking about, like, what are we showing? Now, my kid's been singing Into the Woods since I took him to see it.
Yep.
He's 10. And, he doesn't always get the lyrics right. He's more like, into the woods, the cow is dead. Or no, he's like, into the woods, the dad is dead. I have to sell the cow instead. And I'm like, close, very close.
I like that version.
Yeah, I was like, okay. But he was asked about Into the Woods recently, and somebody said to him, have you seen Into the Woods Junior? He goes, no, I've seen Into the Woods. And he goes, what is Junior? And they said, well, that's just the first act. And he goes, what? Just the first act? He goes, you're lying to all these kids? They think there's happy endings? He's like, that's terrible. You have to tell them. You have to tell these kids that there are consequences.
Yep.
He's like, there are consequences when you kill a giant. His wife is going to come after you. And I was glad that he was able to see a diverse company.
Mm-hmm.
Because he can feel like there's some representation of him growing up. There's some, that people are acknowledging that he's a human. And you have a child that has Asian background as well. So
right.
She have,
And that's a dilemma that I'm gonna have at some point. No, I want her to get. I was raised in the theater because all of my family did theater, still does theater and singing and all that kind of stuff. My daughter, like, I can just show you literally right here. I mean, she has no Asian features whatsoever, but I know that how do you handle, because I feel like I would know your answer, is that I feel like she should be allowed to play an primarily Asian character, but how do you handle that when society is so, it should be sensitive, but, like, when it's so sensitive right now, how do you deal with that? How do you justify her being that character, and people that do recognize that she has no Asian features, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I always say, like, I'm the white people's Asian, right? Mm-hmm. People look at me, white people clock me all the time. Oh, you're Asian. I know exactly what you are. Asian people do not think that I present as Asian at all.
So my wife says the same exact thing. It's also somebody that doesn't act black enough. I've heard that some of my black friends are, they're not stereotypically acting black, and they get that all the time. They're not black enough to their black friends, and they're not white, it's just, I mean, so yeah, I get you.
Mixed race people always have a harder time. And a lot of people want to dispute that, but it's true, because you're not really accepted by the white side, and you're not really accepted by the other ethnic side that you're mixed with. And then the question of, like, privilege and, like, light skin privilege and all that kind of stuff comes in, and it kind of muddies the waters. But the truth is, like, phenotypically, I am not correct for some roles. Even if by genome I should be able to play those parts, people are simply not going to hire me. And that's what's going to happen to your kid if they decide to go into the theater, or they try. Like, there are some parts that the people be like, no, we know you're a quarter Chinese, like, we get it, but you don't look that way, and so we don't feel comfortable allowing you to tell that story. And that's kind of out of your hands
Mm-hmm.
as an actor. Um, there was one Christmas Eve controversy where the girl swore up and down that her great 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 grandmother came from the Samoan Islands, which would have made her like 132nd Pacific Islander. And to my way of thinking, but she did not appear Asian.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like there was nothing in her background to indicate that she felt affinity for it or had even ever brought it up. She just mentioned it when they were casting that particular Avenue Q because she wanted like a little bit of an edge,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So walk me through walk me through like a short scenario so that I can see how, like, just for instance, if my wife isn't there to help me with this, I want to be able to be there for my daughter and be able to advocate for her, but I want to do it as well as I can. So walk me through some sort of scenario where I can make some good decisions here.
Well, I think that you're just really honest with her and you say, like, you know what? You are a combination kid, right? You're mommy and you're daddy. And daddy, his family looks one way, and mommy's family looks two different ways. So really, you're three different kinds of people within yourself, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then you just tell her, like, some people are going to think you look like mommy, and some people are going to think you look like daddy, and some people are going to think you look like neither one of us, because that always happens, right? Some people are like, you don't look like your parents at all. So then you say, like, how do you feel? What do you feel you look like? I always remember when Halle Berry tells that story, because Halle Berry is mixed race. And her mom took her and put her in front of a mirror and said, what do you see? And she said, I see a little black girl. And her mom said, well, then that's what you are. It didn't matter to her mom, certainly, but it's what people see. And unfortunately, we're not in charge of what people see. So it's hard with mixed race kids. It's hard.
Yeah.
But she can still learn the language. She can still learn to cook the food. She can still do all it doesn't make her, in my eyes, less Asian. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's a cousin, just like your wife is a cousin, just like, every Asian person I know, I'm like, oh, hi, cousin. I don't believe in blood quantum. I don't believe in, I'm borrowing that from the Native Americans, but that's like a common term. I don't believe either in the one drop rule. I'm just like, if people say that's what they are, then that's what they are. But it's going to be hard for her if she really identifies as Asian and phenotypically people don't see it. And it will be hard for her. And I think as your dad, you just have to say, you know what you are on the inside. You know who your family is. You know who loves you. It doesn't matter what other people think. And honestly, she looks like a little white girl, so probably that's not going to come up.
No, it probably won't.
Until they see her mom, and then that's who they're going to say stuff to.
And she does get that quite a lot, unfortunately. She gets but so did
You the nanny. Yeah, I've gotten that a lot.
But she also gets she's been dealing with it her whole life because her mother is a white, blonde, blue-eyed woman. So, and now that her father has passed I think she was 15 when she passed, we'll go out to dinner or something like that, and they'll assume that she's my mother, automatically. And it's something that we deal with, and Tammy deals with everything with grace very, very well, I think. But she also has a strong voice that she uses. She has a very strong voice. She has a great balance between the two, which I really appreciate, because I want her to use her voice. That I also get nervous that it affects her more than that she lets on, because she's such a strong woman, you
It
know.
probably does affect her, and she probably is not entirely comfortable sharing it with you because, you know,
Um,
you're not going to get it. You're
I
not going to.
know, I know, and I wish I would get.
You have to like let yourself not get it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to give yourself permission to say like I don't understand because my husband is 100% Asian,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's Korean. And he said this to me relatively recently, like within the last 2 years. He said, I used to think that you made stuff up when you
Mm-hmm.
said XYZ happened to me because I'm mixed. And then he said, and over the years, I've realized that you didn't make any of it up. He's like, it's just something that when people can't immediately identify what you are or where you fit, they say some of the worst stuff to you, and you're just supposed to take it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember I did a concert, and it was the Irish music concert, and this man came up to me and he said, well, I'll say this for you. He goes, one, you can sing, and two, your eyes got rounder as the show went on. And he thought that that was like an amazing compliment.
Of course he did. Mm-hmm.
Of course he did. And I was like, uh, and it's still, I mean, I haven't, the man that used to produce those concerts has passed away. So, I mean, but that comment has stayed with me.
And they do. No matter how small they are, they stay with you. You don't forget them. You don't. You don't forget them.
You don't. It's really hard. And it's also hard as anybody to say when listening to something that's happened to a spouse or a friend or whatever, to just say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I can't imagine. Please feel free to talk more about it. Because at a certain point, it's like you can't understand, you can't unpack how much racism plays a daily part in somebody's life.
I mean, one of the things,
it's too uncomfortable. It's like too hard.
It really is. Now, I don't know if you know who Dane Cook is, but he's a comedian back from the 2000s. He's trying to get himself back now, by the way. He's amazing. He's very, very talented. But he talked about one time in one of his albums, he was talking to his black friend, and, the guy was talking about some issues that he was having because of his ethnicity, and he said, no, I can understand that. And he goes, no, you can't understand. And he goes, well, I can appreciate. No, you can't even appreciate. And I thought it was a funny joke. And I heard this again not that long ago, and I went, you really can't. No matter how much you listen to it, no matter how much you want to, you just can't. So now I don't say any of that stuff. I don't say, oh yeah, I get that. I just say, I'm sorry. What else can I say? There's nothing. I can lend an ear, but I can't understand it. I can do as much as I can. That's what I'm here for now. But there's only so much, that you can do when it comes to that kind of stuff. And my wife doesn't she's a doctor. And
well, that's good.
yeah. And she deals with not just being half Asian, and obviously, of course, she comes in and they're expecting a full-on, because of her last name being Chin, they expect a full-on Asian male doctor, right. Of course. She'll go halfway through with a patient, and they'll go, oh, and when the doctor gets in, blah, 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 and she goes, no, I'm your doctor, because they assume that she's the nurse. They always assume and anytime I mention them, they're like, oh, what does your wife do? I was like, oh, well, she just got out of medical school. And they said, oh, she became a nurse. I said, no, I said medical school, not nursing school. When you say, oh, I just got off the phone with my doctor, they say, oh, what did he say? Automatically. It's always been a he, no matter how. My wife's residency class was all female, which I thought was just, trying to break that. And they're all incredible. They're just absolutely incredible women, and just absolutely amazing people. Some of my, actually, one of my favorite groups of people I've ever met were those resident ladies. They're just absolutely amazing. Very, they have strong voices, and they let it be heard. I hear a lot of good stuff about what they did at the hospital that they worked at. It was just really wonderful. So, and I'm glad that my wife was a part of it.
It's always a combination, like nothing, no aggression happens in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a combination. It's like misogyny and the patriarchy and race and background and your accent and everything else. I am a dual citizen. I'm a dual citizen of Australia and the United States. So
Mm-hmm.
I have had the benefit of having racism all over the world. and it's like I have cousins in Australia that will not take public transportation, which, in New York, you're like, what are you talking about? But there are so many Asians that are attacked on the daily in Australia on public transportation. He just flat out, he made his money, so he doesn't really have to, but he's like, I will not take public transportation. He's like, I am one person.
That's scary.
I am not, and he's a guy. He's over 6 foot tall. He's an athlete. He's a professional. He's been a professional snowboarder. So to look at him, you'd be like, why would this guy have any problem anywhere? But there's always issues with people all over the world.
It's
and
crazy.
That's the other part that mixed race people have to realize. We're in the age of mixed race people are a relatively new thing to people in the world.
Yeah.
There's no good name for a mixed race person. Every mixed race name that you hear that's in Asian culture is a slur, except for in Native Hawaiian, the term hapa. Hapa means half.
And that's an okay term?
No, it's not really.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
Well, because now Native Hawaiians are like, we don't want people using hapa. But because for years we've all been described as hapa. Hapa means half. It means the actual term is hapa haole, which is half other, half foreign, right?
It's kind of like, it's like mudblood.
Yeah, a little bit, but they didn't have the disdain attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
But now, because Native Hawaiians are sensitive towards wanting to retain their culture and the right to name people, it's not the done thing to call yourself that. So now we've all switched to mixed.
Mm-hmm.
But every group that is Asian in the world has terrible kind of names for mixed race people. And so because we are relatively new, like in Japanese, I think it's haifu, and I forget what it is in Chinese, but I've been called it. But the thing is, we just, in some ways, we have to wait for the world to catch up to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we are the first line. I always say, I'm like, damn, I should have been born 20 years later, right? Because then I'd be totally on it. A lot of the opportunities that they have now, because of the perceptions of mixed race people now, are things that could never have happened when I was young. So with each generation, with each progression, the world does get a little bit more open, but the consequence of that is the more open it gets, the more people who feel threatened by that openness clamp down and double down on the aggressive racist things that they grew up with, the more they want to cling to it. So you're going to have, as a mixed race person, all this growth within your lifetime. I've seen tons of growth within my lifetime, but it's going to always be tempered by that one jerk you run into at the store.
Yeah. I mean,
who doesn't like it.
So one of the things I wanted to kind of, so I just went, as I said, to New York. I spent 2 weeks there. I saw 4 shows. I saw A Strange Loop. I saw Paradise Square. I saw one of the last performances. That was totally robbed, I'm telling you. Did you see it? I will have to.
I didn't see it, but they closed early because Garth Drabinsky didn't pay anybody. Yeah.
That I will tell you that deserved more Tonys than it got. It was out of this world.
Really
one of the
seeing it after the Tonys.
Yes. Because I saw Strange Loop. I saw that. I saw the Harry Potter Cursed Child,
Hmm.
and I think I saw something else. But regardless, for me, I was like, okay, so there's like this Black Hermione. There's like these two are very like diverse, shows. You have the Strange Loop, and then you have Paradise Square, and I loved the story. Do you know anything about Paradise
Yeah,
Square?
I
Because
know. Well, it's about the how tap dancing kind of came to be, right?
yeah,
And tap dancing, which I always knew because I was Irish,
hmm
um, was a combination of Irish step dancing and like African rhythms.
yeah, it was just incredible. The tears coming down my face when I saw this show. Oh man, like I mean, I know that you can see her performance, the lead actress's
Oh
performance
yeah.
on the Tonys. It
Hmm.
does no justice to what you see on that stage. It was one of the most surreal moments of my life. Literally, everybody was on their feet halfway through the song,
Oh yeah, that happened every night because I
and
know people in the show. Yeah,
it was
happened.
incredible. I mean, and after I saw this, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. In my eyes, I'm seeing a difference in diversity when it comes to Broadway. I feel like every time I go and see a new show in New York or see it in Boston, because I'm usually pretty close to Boston, I see a lot of stuff at the Opera House and the
Mhm.
Colonial Theater. I'm seeing more of it coming around.
Of course,
Um,
there's always going to be, theater people are some of the most generous people in the planet, and yet
yes.
they can be awful.
Oh,
We
it's
all know. We
night and
can
day, night and
we
day.
can be we can be equally terrible and wonderful all at the same time, all within the same show, all within the
Hmm
same cast. But um, there is there are shows that are diverse, and those shows are great, and we love to see that. But sometimes the conversation becomes kind of like, well, we have Hamilton, so we fix everything. And then you'll see like if you saw, I think Tracy Letts The Minutes has like no people of color in it. There's then shows that are like, well, let's make up for all that diversity that's happening everywhere else. And like everything's, yeah. So no one show is going to
Change it.
change it. It's kind of a progression over time. And like, then there are the classics that people are doing, like all of a sudden, they're doing an all one kind of ethnicity show. And those shows are great, but I mean, what you want to see is like newer shows that kind of show inclusion and are kind of built into the story but I do think it's changing. Absolutely it's changing.
Hmm
But, for the thing is, like, African Americans have such a deep history, and it's obviously not great with the United States, but they have been here since almost the beginning. And Native Americans have been here Native Americans were here before the beginning of the United States. And so there's a lot for writers to pull from. And I feel like for Asian Americans, the stories are beginning for us not at the beginning of when we arrived. They're kind of starting to like in modern times, you
hmm
know.
hmm
So even as we're seeing all these plays and they're all great, very few of them. There's one musical that's hopefully going a little bit further called Gold Mountain that kind of deals with the origin of the Chinese in the United States, and like the HBO show Warrior, which is amazing and you should totally watch,
Okay.
deals with the origin of Chinese Americans in the United States.
hmm
Um, but other than those two that I can point to, there hasn't been a show or a play that is not dealing with Asian Americans set in modern time. Like everything seems to be in modern times for us,
hmm
which negates all our contributions to the country prior to. Like Wong Kim Ark, that should. Why is there no? We have a few good men, and that would seem to be the same kind of thing. You know, so there's a lot of work to be done. But I do think Broadway's getting more inclusive. But when it comes to Asian representation, because Asian representation is so vast and so specifically nuanced, each group, like if somebody's Pakistani, they are not Chinese. And, like obviously there's some intersections on occasion. But like if you're writing about South Asian culture, that's a specific, group. And even within that group, there's so much diversity that you would have to pick and choose which group you're writing about and all that kind of stuff. So like we just have so much, but so much of it is based outside of the United States. And so it's hard in some ways to get playwrights to have that turn on, like, oh no, we've been here. We're here. Like, you can write about us just like we're people.
Yep.
Just like we're, and like when I used to speak to like television writers, I would say to them, write a character, write the script you want to write, absolutely. And then at the end, when you describe the characters, make one of them Asian. And they'd be like, what? You can do that? I'm like, you can do that. We don't always have to sit here and talk about our ethnicity all the time.
Right.
Like, there doesn't need to be a Tong episode to justify having Asians on television. There doesn't need to be a brothel or a bordello or opium coming in to justify why we're there, why our faces are there. They can just be like, that's the detective, or that's the doctor, or that's, like there's a lot of power sometimes in just saying like, this is the world that I've created and here's how we're doing it, and that's it. And not answering like the deep fundamental questions. Like, and there's always got to be a balance, and that's the truth. And we're always still riding this, how much education are we putting into it when it's really more about art? But if we don't have art with education, then holes happen and misunderstandings happen, and it's never going to be solved within my lifetime, I don't think.
It's going to take absolutely forever. And,
absolutely forever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it will never stop. And that's, again, where my podcast title came up to Room to Grow. There's always room to grow. Like always, no matter how well versed you are. And you could always learn more and be a better ally to everybody out there, which is just as important as doing anything is also knowing. It's also
right.
Knowing.
Like, it's funny because I was I was doing Broadway Con, and my son and I were in the elevator. We were getting up to the elevator, and the elevator had to be operated by a person in this space.
Okay.
They're not having it at the same space next year. Anyway, the person in the elevator that was operating it was trans, but I didn't even clock that. And I went in and I said, we're going to the 8th floor, sir. And because the energy was coming off very like masculine. And then my son stopped me and said, Mom, did you ask their pronouns? And I was like, oh. And that's when
Awesome.
I went, oh, Liam, I didn't ask your pronouns. I said, excuse me, would you let me know your pronouns? I didn't mean to misaddress you. Because, honestly, I didn't know which way this individual was going with their transition or whatever. Like, I just thought they were a man. I didn't, And they smiled and they said, my pronouns are he, him. And I was like, oh, thank God. and it was, but Liam, who's 10, was like, see, Mom, you always have to ask people's pronouns because sometimes they'll surprise you and sometimes you're right. And I said, Liam, yes, you are correct. And there was another person from Broadway Con in the elevator, and she goes, well, that was just amazing. I've been schooled by my 10-year-old.
I love it. I love everything about that. Yep.
The world is very much changing, particularly now. We're in a huge time of change, and with that comes pushback.
Yep.
But if we continue to talk about it and continue to be open and continue to have the conversations, even when you're wrong, then at least we can all get a better picture of it and move forward.
Yep. Well, I think with that, we've gotten a lot of stuff done on this podcast. You answered some stuff I wasn't even thinking about, which was just awesome. So I feel like I can go into like my next, picking out what shows I'm going to be doing next. It will help me a little bit decide is this cast going to represent the right people and all that kind of stuff. It makes me feel, because I'm not just going to do a show just because I want to do that show. If we're not doing that show justice, if we're not, it's not meant for me at that time. There are certain characters that were not written for me. Just because I'm able to play all sorts of different characters, there's just some that I shouldn't. And I'm very, I'll be honest with you, I'm lucky that I'm a white male.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
God.
I mean, there's so many options for me.
There's endless options.
Exactly.
It's like I think one of the rules, I always say to people, you're a white male in theater, you should take a little bit from the medical profession, and that should be your first rule, which is first, do no harm. Right?
Mm-hmm.
First, do no harm. So, like, if you decide to accept a part that has traditionally been played by a person of color, you really have some issues to grapple with. And sometimes it's perfectly fine, and sometimes it's not.
Right. I didn't get a definitive answer from you. What was it? I understand where you were coming from with Tom Collins, because it was primarily black, and I did know that. But in my eyes, I felt like because it wasn't part of his story, that it was okay for me to play that character. But do you feel differently about that? Because if you do, I want to know before.
I don't know. I understand both points of view.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing about Tom Collins being ethnically anything in the show. And I've seen the show with, like, Tom Collins being black, being mixed, being, a bunch of different ethnicities. So, but knowing what Michael Greif intended and being a little bit closer to the original Broadway production and the cast of the original Broadway production, I would say, going forward, I'd prefer if Tom Collins were played by a person of color. But I'm not going to say it's wrong that you did it, because there's nothing about Tom Collins being ethnic.
Right.
In that part. Like, he doesn't use AAVE. He's not, although I guess he says flow. He says, I have a little hunch I could use a little flow.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Use a little flow. So maybe, I think that's but, like, I wouldn't have a problem if Tom Collins was Puerto Rican or Latinx or Asian. I think that's a really open show. I would be more inclined to get more strict about, like, Angel should be played by a trans person.
Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah. So when we did it, was it at the time, my friend Mason was he, his, but by now they are non-binary. So
right.
Yeah, and they did such an amazing job with that role. But actually, I've never had such a connection with somebody on stage than I have with Mason. The two of us just, the chemistry was there, and I've said that I'm not attracted to men, I'm or anything like that, but I actually fell in love with that character.
Have to.
Like, I actually did, and like my wife knows. I was like, I am literally in love with Angel. I'm in love with Mason as a person. It was I've never had a connection like that with anybody other than my wife, and it was very interesting, life-changing, really. So it was definitely one of my favorite characters to play, and I would love to be able to play him again, but going forward, it would be something that I definitely have to think about.
I don't think it's wrong.
Right.
I don't think it's wrong. I just think that if the director really felt like they didn't have another option, then go ahead.
Understandable.
But, like,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't have it necessarily, but, like, just going from the original company and knowing what Michael Greif intended and knowing what Jonathan Larson intended and the people that he based those characters on,
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome to know.
I would honor that, but
mm-hmm.
I can see that, no, that character is not, like, I always thought and I know Freddie, and I was always like, "Oh, I'd love to play Joanne sometime, because Joanne is another character that's like, it's not really tied to her ethnicity. It's more tied to her sexuality and like her toughness and everything else. So I was always like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you could play Joanne. You could cast it a different way. So like, we can't end the casting conversations, because there are definite choices to be made, and like, it's who's available, who can sing it.
It's not a yes or no question. It's not one or the other. There's a lot of factors that need to be put in, and what you have available to you. So yeah, I agree with that. And that's
it's not like, I wish it was such a black and white answer where I was like,
I know.
No, absolutely not. But it's not, because the character is not. Yeah, I've seen so many friends play it, and it doesn't seem to ever be tied to the background. That's just who they cast. But again, if they cast somebody that was Asian American, or if they cast somebody that was Latinx or black, I would not have a problem with it. So I would say that, like, if they did cast you as Tom Collins, then maybe they should look at who they're casting for Mark. And say like, okay, well, Tom Collins is white in this production, but Mark is black or Latinx, or you know what I mean? Like, the whole theme of Rent in particular, because I knew Jonathan, not well, but I knew him, and was just that it's like the most diverse, sexiest group of people that he could ever imagine. Like, that's what he wanted. He wanted sexy, hot people that look like the East Village.
I love that. That's good. That's really cool to know. Yeah.
Yeah. He like loved talent. He loved creativity. He was so enthused about musical theater and the art form and like the process of it. And I think you can see that in his work. And I think you can see that in, like, certainly in Tick Tick Boom that was on Netflix. That Lin-Manuel directed. It's that same kind of thing. And I think all the pieces, like I've seen Hamilton a couple of different ways, cast a couple different ways. And the truth is, like, just acknowledge that there are other talented people in the room, and, everybody brings themselves to it. So as long as you bring yourself to it, I think you're kind of okay.
Yeah.
If there's not a cultural specificity to it. And then even when, like, Once on This Island, the last time it was revived, which was so brilliant.
I wanted to see that so bad. It looked fan-flippin-tastic. It looked so good.
It was so good. But I had a couple of friends in that show, but one of the lead actors was mixed, and he played Daniel.
Okay.
And the thing was, it didn't, his Daniel was very, very light skinned, because that actor is very light skinned. And there was another Broadway actor that came who is darker skinned, and he got very upset that Daniel was played by a light skinned actor, and kind of popped off on social media.
Oh, jeez.
And the whole thing is, like, that particular show is legitimately about colorism and about privilege and about everything else. So, conversations need to be had even within our own groups.
Right.
And I know people approached that other actor and told them that person is, mixed race, African American. But, there was harm done because that person didn't understand. So, like, everybody's growing and learning, and all that we can acknowledge is that this is a time of change.
Right. Oh, it totally is. It definitely is. People are saying that I've been hearing a lot of this. People are saying, well, everybody's so sensitive right now, and I'm like, we need to be. And it's not so much that we're sensitive, it's more that we're taking big strides and saying, this is what I want to be, this is what I want to be called, this is how I want to be treated. This is who I want to be seen as. And because, since I've been born, the first 20 somewhat years of my life, we've been taking small steps. Right. And not enough change. if we can spend the next 10 years just being overcorrecting, you could even call it that, overcorrecting for the
It
next
is
10 years,
overcorrect. Yeah, it's absolutely.
if we can overdo this for 10 years, then maybe in 10 years we can like chill out and take a breather and be in a good space. I mean, again, we'll still have more places to go, but if we can just like, I mean, you think about like this. I think it might have been you that just said it a little while ago. Like, going back to like the '60s, where like all of these big changes are happening. If we can do this for 10 years and make some big strides, why not? You know,
Yeah,
I want to be in a place where if I just if I realized that I was something other than what people have been calling me, and someone calls me, oh, I'm just letting you know this is where I'm at.
yeah.
That's a I'm not being sensitive, even if I'm upset and hurt or whatever. I'm allowed to be, because that's difficult. I can see how difficult that. I mean, I can't see, but it must be difficult. We already just talked about that, but
Yeah,
um,
you can you can have empathy
mm-hmm,
for other people. You're never gonna know what
mm-hmm.
it's like because you're not walking in those
Well,
shoes.
even people that are going through, as you like, even if you're going through something similar, it doesn't mean that you can understand either. Everybody's going through something completely different,
Right.
even though it's the same thing. It's also completely different.
I think there's a universality in being a person of color
Mm-hmm.
that so like you can relate experiences that you've had to experiences that they've had, but there's never like for example, I'm never going to be black. I'm never going to be black.
Right.
And my closest friends happen to be black.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand. I listen with as much compassion as I can,
Mm-hmm.
not as
Good.
I can, but like I listen with compassion,
Mm-hmm.
and I try to picture how that whatever was said to them or whatever occurred to them, how that would affect me.
Right.
And and I'll give an example. Like one of my friends, she's a very well known Broadway person, and so is her husband. Um, she happens to be African American. When there was a racial incident, um, nothing, Broadway hadn't said anything about it. Broadway hadn't said anything about it. And yet, there is a huge contingent of people who are African American that Broadway makes a dime off of, more than a dime, right? They headline shows, they do this. And so I said to her, what can I do to help? And she was like, I don't know, I don't know. And I said, would it be okay if I wrote something on the blog? And she was like, well, what are you going to write? And I said, I don't know. I never know until I write it. So I wrote a piece pointing out that though I am not African American, I acknowledge how many contributions and holding up African Americans have done for Broadway, for the theatrical community, and like how they were in pain, and how none of our institutions, our unions, our theaters, nobody had said anything. That nobody had said anything to comfort them, to acknowledge them, to say that, Black Lives Matter. Nobody had done that. And I said, just from my perspective, that's wrong.
Right.
And then
Mm-hmm.
very soon after, within a day or two, people did start issuing statements of support. Um, and she said to me, I know that was all you. And I was like, it wasn't all me, but sometimes people need to be reminded because sometimes people don't know what to do in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell them what to do, they will do it. Now, it doesn't make it right that they were late. It doesn't make it right.
Right.
But as a person who is not black, trying to support that community, it was the right thing to do for me to say something. And so I lent my support, which is, I mean, that's not even the right thing to do. Right thing to say. That's not lending support. It's not kind of the right thing to say. But I pointed out that there was a deficiency, and that pointing it out was helpful to getting movement, to getting traction.
Right. This is
And so
just right.
that's how I, as a non-black person of color,
Mm-hmm.
can help. You want to acknowledge and appreciate everybody and everybody's culture, and you do what you can. You do
Yeah.
what you can.
Yeah. I think this is just very important stuff that a lot of people already know all of these things that we're
Yeah.
saying, but they need, um, people need, oh gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? They,
Reminders.
they need a reminder. That was one word that I was looking for. And then they also need, to, oh gosh, the word isn't on the top of my tongue, on the tip of my tongue. It's, they need to know that that's the right way to feel. There's a word for that. Um,
Need to know that compassion is okay,
yep.
and we also need to know that like action coupled with compassion can really change a lot of things.
They need to be reinforced that
Yeah.
this is how they're feeling, and that this is the appropriate way to feel. It might be tweaked a little bit, but here it is. And that's just that's what I'm here for. So, again, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. It is 2:15. I knew that
Yeah, I know. I gotta go.
you gotta go. We spent a lot longer than I thought we were going to, but this is a lot of good stuff that I can't wait to play around with in my editing and get it up there, and I'll let you know how it's all going. But is there anything else you want to leave anybody with before we?
No, just like kind of walk through the world with a little bit more kindness. You
Yes.
know,
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic has taken a toll on everybody, and I don't think any of us are okay. And I have noticed a tendency for people to be more reactive. So I think that the best way to move forward is to acknowledge that everybody's on a hairpin
Mm-hmm.
trigger and allow, on occasion you're going to have to bite your tongue and just be like, you're right, I can't understand, I'm sorry, I wish I could, or would you like to talk more about this, or would you like to, do you need like give the people the space they need to discuss these issues, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just like, I'm right, you're wrong,
Yeah.
end of story,
Exactly. Yep, that's what I'm going to be here for. I know I'm going to make tons of mistakes. I'm going to say the wrong things, or maybe not have it 100% where I should have it, and that's okay. I'm not afraid anymore in where I'm putting myself in these situations on this podcast. I'm not going to be afraid to be wrong. I'm not going to be
Yeah,
afraid
don't be afraid to be wrong.
to be corrected. That's what I want. So I'm going to say exactly what's in my head, and then hope that someone comes back and says, "All right, well, you said these things. This is how I'm going to respond," and that's wonderful. That's what I'm hoping for.
Okay,
So yeah, awesome. So
well, there we go.
there we go. Thanks so much for listening. If you are looking to get involved in future conversations, please email me with your questions about literally anything at roomtogrowwithchad@gmail.com. I hope you always leave today feeling like you learned something new and that it can help you be a better ally and a better human being. Hope you come back and grow with me a little more. Thank you so much.